Okay, so I've got the breaker panel here, and then the transformer up in that's the transformer. This is the breaker panel. The white wire that comes into it is the wire that comes from the inverter. This is just to show you kind of how it first starts out. Okay. So now we're going to take our leads here, and we're going to find 240 volts. It'll be 239 something because it's a long ways from the inverter. But there we have 239.8 volts. And that's saying it's going to turn off. And then from neutral to this, we've got 49 millivolts, 48 millivolts. So there's not really anything on the neutral because there's nothing to be had on the neutral. So now I'm going to hook up the transformer and we'll see what difference that makes on our breaker. Alright, so now I've got the inverter wired in. And you'll see I don't have any grounds hooked up from anything, even the one that comes from the inverter. The inverter does not get grounded anywhere. If the inverter becomes grounded, it will go into a fault, and you could possibly blow the main board, which is about $350 on a 6,000 or 5,000 watt inverter. A lot more than that on an 8K or 11K. So anyway, just make sure the inverter is not grounded. Everything else from this point out is grounded. So all of your house, you know, just make sure all your grounding conductors are bonded to. You'll have to get one at the store. This didn't come with it. Some boxes come with them, some don't. But it'll be another bus bar just like this right here, the neutral. But it'll screw down into the back of this thing, one for this side and one for this side. And then you tie all your neutrals, the correct term is you bond all the neutrals to that bus bar that you install inside of here. So now we're going to measure our voltage, and just like last time on the breaker, hot to hot, 240 volts. Or very close to that. And then neutral to one of the hots, 120. And neutral to the other hot, 120. You remember whenever I did that, we were only getting millivolts readings out of this thing. So that's something that you want to make sure that you check everything with a voltmeter as you're doing it so that you don't end up having something backwards and really ending up with a mess. So on this guy here, another thing I want to point out on the breaker panel is these guys here, you have a breaker that clips on here and then here. So the one on this side clips here, the one on this side clips here. Both of these breakers share the same phase, and then this one is another phase. You can see that it alternates. And where the transformer comes into play with this is that you want to make sure that, say for instance, you're going to have two kitchen outlets. You want to have them not here and here, but instead here and here, if that makes sense. Let me get my handy pointer here. Not here and here, but here and here, or here and here, but not where they're sharing the same bus bar. So say for instance in the kitchen you've got your microwave plugged into one outlet, your toaster or coffee pot or whatever plugged into the other outlet. You get enough things running off of one side of this and you could end up exceeding the 5,000 watts capability of the transformer. So as long as you keep them balanced, so take for an instance, if you've got 500 watts on this lug and 500 on this one, they cancel each other out, so there's zero watts going through the transformer. Nothing's going through the transformer. It's just kind of sitting there along for the ride. But if you've got 3,000 watts running on this guy and 500 on this guy, you still got 2,500 watts riding through one leg in that transformer that it's having to balance out. So you want to try to keep those balanced out. If you got a shop, you're going to have an air compressor. You know, just try to keep those balanced between each other. Anything that's 240 volts is the best way to go. If you're going to buy a MIG welder and you can find one that's 240 volts, that's a better way to go. If you're going to get a plasma cutter, 240 volts is better than 120 volt, because that way none of that will go through the transformer. And it's not that the transformer can't handle it, but if you pile too many things on one of the legs, then that could cause problems for the transformer, make it too hot. That's what you want to avoid. So just use some, you know, thinking in your head. Make sure that each one of these legs, you've got power distributed between the two legs. So like if you got a shop compressor here, and in your kitchen, say your microwave oven over here, and then this one would run your coffee pot and your toaster, and then this one would run the other outlets in your shop where you have your drill press or whatever. Just keep them so that the things that are most likely to run together at the same time are not on the same lugs, and that will make life much easier. I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but the light on the transformer is not lit, and that's because we got it disabled, but it obviously works because we checked it with the voltmeter. Also, you're going to use a ground. This is one that I had from another job, but this is number 8 wire, and it's fairly heavy, but you want to take this. This is going to go to one of your grounding lugs inside the box. You know, it could be, if you have it over here, then you put it here, drill a hole through your butt. Well, this has knockouts on the bottom here, so you know, just big enough for the wire to go through, and then you run the wire out, tie it to an 8-foot ground rod with a grounding rod clamp, and that'll keep your system safe, especially being in Texas where you're at. You get this thing and it's not grounded, and you could blow up a whole lot of expensive equipment, not the least of which is your inverter. So make sure that you ground it all the way to a grounding rod, bond all your ground conductors in here, and then you see this little green screw right here. This green screw is what's called a bonding screw. It bonds your neutral to your ground. This should be the only place in your house, actually in your whole system, where the neutral and the ground are bonded together, because they should have the same ground potential. If you do, say you put a sub panel somewhere and you don't, and you run this bonding screw down in there so that it bonds the neutral to this, you can cause a grounding loop. So if you put a sub panel in, you're not going to run the bonding screw down to the case of this thing. So just keep that in mind. For your main panel, you definitely want to run this green screw down so that your neutral is bonded to the ground. And I think that's about all I can think of. I'm gonna go to the breaker panel in my house to show you an actual setup that's live. Kind of give you a little bit better perspective on it, or at least another perspective. Alright, so one thing that I need to go over right quick is you'll see that I have 2 wires going under each lug on this breaker. Do not do that. This was just to demonstrate this, but this is pretty dangerous. You can do it if they're the same gauge wire, because one of these is 10 gauge, the other one's 14 gauge. And so what happens is you get one of those in there and you can actually pull it out of the screw, but somehow I managed to get it tight enough it's not pulling out. But a lot of times you get these where the thicker wire is clamped in good and the thinner wire just slides in and out. You want to be real careful about that, putting multiple wires under a screw. If you put 2 wires under there, make sure they're the same gauge, one on one side, one on the other. And another thing I want to talk about is the inverter. If it's a 6 kilowatt or below inverter, you can run 10 gauge wire everywhere. 10 gauge wire from the transformer to here, 10 gauge wire from the inverter to here as well. If it's a 8 kilowatt or above, you need to use at least a number 8 wire. And for the transformer, you can still use number 10 wire, because there should never be 30 amps going through the neutral side of that anyway. It should always balance out if it's working properly, if you got it wired properly. Okay, so this is my 2 inverters and my breaker panel. The inverter over here to the left is not hooked up to this breaker panel at all. So this is only talking about these 2 here. But the breaker panel, you can see that I've got number 8 wires coming in. And then it goes into the main lugs up here, and there's no main breaker in here. The reason I don't have a main breaker is because the inverter has basically a main breaker. And then I've got another set of number 8 wires that come in here for the stove. But I've got a 30 amp breaker on it, and we don't ever run any more than 2 burners at a time. Got a heat pump air conditioning system, 110 volt well water pump, jet pump. Better to have that 240 volts. This goes out towards the driveway, actually the garage where we were in just a little bit ago, and then all the rest of these are 110 volt breakers. So if you look at this, I've got the kitchen, the 2 breakers, one above the other. That way they're on 2 different circuits, on 2 different phases of that inverter. And then the microwave is down here, and then the pump across from that. Bathroom, you know, hair dryer, that kind of thing. Bedroom up here, the north wall, just different things. But try to arrange your breakers so that they balance out in the transformer. You can see over here on the left, I've got neutral, and then over on this side, neutral, and then here in this part, I've got a ground bar, and then over here I have a ground bar. So there's 2 ground bars inside this panel. You can see my main ground that comes up from the ground rod, comes up from the bottom, goes up and ties into the ground bar. And that's pretty much it. Got the neutral tied into the neutral over here. I should have a bonding screw in this thing, but I don't see one. Apparently I've done a little misdeed here. But anyway, that's what it looks like. Yep, keep your wires nice and neat and square, and everything will be easier to trace out if you ever have issues down the line.